It was certainly a busy week, and of course, a whole lot did come out of that. We're going to try to touch on some of those issues, especially by the minister right there. But first of all, last week we did have the Chief Executive Officer of the Delta Special Economic Zone on the program, and he told us about the event which begins today. That's the Delta State Economic and Investment Summit. Well, it begins today, so for our DSTV viewers, I'll be taking you to Delta State, where that summit begins. And the theme is harnessing our strength, unlocking our potentials. That's what is going to be the conversation. But if you'd like to continue right here on Business Morning, please just go to our YouTube channel and then jump to the next channel right there, and you will see here. But for our DSTV viewers, we hand you over to Delta State for the State Economic Summit. So now let's look at some of those issues that came out of that forum last week, by especially the one by the minister. And of course, he mentioned subsidy, and everybody's ear came out. So there you have it, some quotes from the subsidy from Mr. Oyedele. He said that the combined impact of subsidy on fuel and FX was gulping about 5% of the country's GDP. And so the removal of those subsidies, of course, we know the unification of the FX rates, he called that subsidy also, that's supposed to have saved the country about 5%. You save money, but saving money, he said, wasn't the primary objective. It was eliminating the distortion and corruption which came with those subsidies in the system. I said it's fundamental, but money saving is also important. He also did say that many Nigerians will simply compare the past with the present and conclude that the reform is not working for them. Some would even say it's a bad reform. What we don't normally compare, or the question we usually don't ask, is what would have happened if the reforms were not carried out? And what would have happened then? And then he said it should have been counterfactual. Then he said before the reforms, we're printing money to spend, interest rate about 8%, minimum wage at 30%. Now, if you just think about those three, these are big numbers. And if you stop printing, then the spending doesn't disappear. You still have to spend, and you need to finance money you were printing before. Now, that was part of where the savings went. That's it. And because the reforms induced higher prices, interest rates obviously went up. So instead of paying 8% on our debt, we are paying 24%. That's part of where he says the savings from the subsidy is going for. And he also talked about, of course, servicing of debts. That when you need to service debts, you don't debate it, whether you need to pay or negotiate, you can negotiate it. A minimum wage has gone up from 30,000 to 70,000. That's about double wage bill for the government. That's another place where the subsidy savings has gone to. And also, he now talked about NEL Fund, another avenue where the subsidy is going to. About 1.5 million students have received not only their tuition but stipend on a monthly basis. So, but he did promise us that we will have a more elaborate and detailed record of both the spending and what it's being used for since the subsidy has been removed, both from the FX and from petrol. So of course we'll be expecting that. But first of all, let's see if we can get some reactions to this, and we're getting this from the Chief Executive Officer of the CFG Advisory, Mr. Tilewa Adebajo. Mr. Adebajo, good morning. Good to have you on the program.
Good morning.
Yeah, so I mean, since the removal of subsidy, a lot of Nigerians have been waiting to really hear, so what has happened to these monies and all of that. And I guess Mr. Oyedele, the minister, did try to give us a little bit of highlight of it, even though he promised there'll be a more elaborate conversation on what the savings have been and what they have been used to. I wonder if you heard that and your comments or reaction following what he has shared.
Well, you see, this is a very sensitive matter because I think the essence of the reform program was that the subsidies that were removed were going to go towards development and, into investments for the benefit of Nigerians. But unfortunately, there has been no clarity as to those numbers. Because I think what should have happened is the fact that I think these numbers should have been quantified. We cannot just say that the allocation to state governments has increased, because two things happened at the same time. You remove the subsidy, and also there was a massive devaluation of the currency. And when I talk about massive, I'm talking about over 150%. That the official rate went from about 4,500 to about 1,800 before it has now settled down at 1,360. So what you have in the system is what you call money illusion. And when you have money illusion in the system, you tend to confuse the nominal value of that money with the real value, which has to do with purchasing power. And to excavate matters, around about the same time, because of the way those reforms were implemented, inflation hit close to 35%. So the triple effect of removal of subsidy, currency devaluation, and inflation going to 35% has just created a money illusion. So we're seeing a lot more money, and we think that that money has real value in terms of real purchasing power. But what we have is money illusion. So I think what is important for me now is for us to have a serious discussion on this with numbers and figures. The last 3 years, the budget deficits have been significant. Right now, the budget deficit, from my own understanding, is close to about 35 trillion naira. And financing that budget has become quite significant. And the government borrowing has gone up significantly, to the extent that domestic borrowing is probably going to hit a record high of 20 trillion this year. Half year, we had already borrowed the same amount we borrowed last year. So there's pressure on the domestic bond markets for government raising money. So we have a significant fiscal imbalances that the Minister of Finance needs to address. It's not just the subsidy savings, because for the last 3 years, they have not also been able to fund the capital budget. So there's significant revenue shortfalls, given the fact that, the sort of budgeting that they're doing. And, to make matters worse, debt service is now the highest line in the budget. Debt service ratios now are going towards 90%. And the debt service budget this year of about 16 trillion is larger than the defense, education, health, and infrastructure budgets combined.
Now he has promised us that in a short while, we're going to get a more elaborate record of all of this. What would you expect to see for it to be satisfactory for someone like you about, yes, I know you said it's beyond the subsidy, but let's just finish with this first. What would you like to see in the account of subsidy savings and spending since removal of subsidy?
Well, what I would like to see is the fact that you have had a shortfall. It's not even like a 50% or 60% shortfall. You've had close to 80 to 90% shortfall on capital expenditure spending over the last 3 years. That is a major concern. And then you have been borrowing significantly. If you take a look at my own borrowings, the way I look at borrowing is very simple. You see, what I would like to see first of all is the real numbers, because we've seen your revenues, and there's been a lot of opaqueness as to how the government revenues have been coming through. We've seen your budget for the last 3 years. That is where the numbers are. And those budgets have significant deficits. So that is, first of all, you need to explain your deficits. Are you over budgeting? Are you budgeting more than what your revenues can support? Because, you have significant deficits over the years. So first of all, I would like him to address those deficits. That's number one. Then when you address the deficits, then you can now address the borrowing. Because if you say you have made that kind of money, what my own estimates of subsidy savings was between $10 to $15 billion a year. That is the savings. That was what the subsidy range was, what we were paying. So the question now is, what has happened to that 10 to 15 billion dollars? That is what I want to understand, because that's what I know is the level that we were paying subsidies, anywhere between 10 to 15 billion dollars. That's the savings. So if you are now budgeting beyond that, then we have significant challenges.
So if we look at it as a whole, the fiscal system, government, you mentioned government revenue, the borrowings, would you say there is an issue around fiscal transparency? And it's not just about the federal government. We can actually look at the state government and we would see similar scenario. Would you say that as a country, there's the issue or there are issues around fiscal transparency, or is it just the sharing of the information with the people that you think is the issue?
There's the fiscal transparency is guided by laws. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So there's what you call the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And these budgets, for instance, and this, so the first thing the minister has to address is you are in violation of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. You're also in violation of the Appropriations Act. So if we have challenges in the system, what are we doing to basically modify the Fiscal Responsibility Act? The problem in Nigeria is not the transparency, but we have what you call a Fiscal Responsibility Commission. This Fiscal Responsibility Commission is the commission that is supposed to be empowered to be able to pick up the red flags and say, okay, you've reached this limit, you've got to this headroom, you need to stop here. That Fiscal Responsibility Commission today is powerless. So when you have a fiscal responsibility that is powerless, government exceeds its fiscal limits. So the Fiscal Responsibility Act is clear. It's a financial circuit breaker to manage fiscal issues. But we're not following those rules. So that's the first thing the minister has to address. The budgetary system is very clear. Budget performance has not been reported. That's the first thing. If you record budget performance, if you say you do a budget, you are supposed to report budget performance every 2 to 3 months. But the budget office is not doing that. Now, as I'm speaking to you today, it is now, we're now in August. We have not been able to come up with our half-year reports because the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics has not released data on second quarter GDP. So how do you know how the economy is performing when all the statutory agents are supposed to give you information on the economy don't get this information out? So we have to extrapolate this information, we have to restructure it and put it together. For instance, the Treasury Office has not told us what the debt profile is since December last year. So you have to add on to what they're doing and look at their monthly auctions and see what they're doing to be able to tap on what they're doing to know what's going on. So it's more than transparency. So what the finance minister needs to address is the breakdown of the process. Because we have a process and we have to go back to that. We follow that process. That is what we depend on from the public side. It is information that is released to the public that we look at. So all these your increased revenues that you are allocating to the state governments, that's money illusion. That's as a result of inflation, devaluation, and removal of subsidy. That is why you are seeing where that money and then the foreign exchange you are looking at changing all this money there. So yes, there are issues with transparency, there are issues with accountability, and there are issues with process. So these are the three things that need to be resolved.
So much for sharing that, and we do hope that the minister, perhaps this will get to him, and when he comes out to give us the breakdown of the subsidy savings, he will go a step further to deal with the processes also. Thank you so much for your time and your views. The Chief Executive Officer of VCFG Advisory, Mr. Tilewa Adebajo.
Good morning.
All right, so our next conversation would be on Nigeria's middle class. There's the story that's fast disappearing. That's if it's still in existence at all. We'll do that with two businessmen, but that'll be after the break. Please stay with us.